Me. Hey, Judy.
Okay, being that it's 6:01, we'll bring this Finance Committee meeting on May 8th to order. First order of business will be approval of the April 17th minutes.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? All
Nope.
right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and I will turn it over to Dan for a presentation on the next year's budget.
So as I kind of just mentioned, this is going to look very similar to, we just did the workshop with the.
Are the bubbles going to have words in them? I can't help it.
Well, I mean, we'll see how closely that mimics the workshop. I mean, I should have just really screwed it up and seen what happened. Thank you, Melanie.
You're welcome. Hold on.
I know.
Somebody had to do it. Somebody had to do it.
So just a revised timeline here. Today, we've got the meeting this evening, and then the adoption of the proposed final budget on Thursday. After that, we need to get the proposed final budget advertised, so we'll slide later on for that. I'll show that. And then ultimately, then we have another committee meeting prior to the ultimately the June 15th adoption of the final budget. So just to reiterate, and there is a change on this. So zero doesn't mean zero. It's really a negative. So ultimately, we need to have some sort of, an increase in order just to maintain our current funding level. You may recall this loss here of the $34,000. This was $21,000. On May 1st, we got the revised property reduction numbers. So essentially that then goes into the calculation of what our real estate tax levy can actually be. We back out the additional funds that are going to come in from basically the state gaming. It was roughly 12 to 13,000. I did have that jotted down. So that is that difference here. And then you'll see that on a later slide where we have the full breakdown of what 0%, 1%, 2% looks like. So just wanted to point that out because when we get to that slide, it'll jump out at you, especially if, for everybody who's been paying attention as we go through this. So we do have an increase here in the expenditures and the revenues from the workshop meeting. This was 1.6, we're up to this 1.88. The primary drivers of this are conversations we're having around the compensation plans and other staffing increases, as well as the additional Title I funds that we received. So we did know that going into the workshop, we wanted to maintain that we were consistent going from the last Finance Committee meeting to the workshop. So we then had to build in those additional revenues that we're going to be receiving from the federal government in Title I. There's going to be then an offsetting expenditure side. So we have additional revenue coming in from the government and then another offsetting expense. The additional revenue expenditures are $149,301. So again, that's the zero, but you do see the increase on both the expenditure and the revenue side. Other areas that we saw increases were also the IT equipment. Jim got pricing back. That was a couple $1,000s more than he had previously budgeted, so we took that into account and adjusted the figures, as well as some IT services that we utilize the IT for. So those are the main changes that kind of came out of the expenditure side, or added to the expenditure side.
Added to the minus.
Exactly. So I know we went through this at the workshop, but for the benefit of our new guests, I can go through this and kind of explain where the 1,000s are instructional based. That will be the 1,100, 1,200, 1,300, 1,700. So these are all instructional expenditures, followed by 2,000 series which include these different departments over here on the right-hand side: guidance, speech, library, etc. There were no changes in those areas from the workshop to this evening's meeting. Similarly, the non-instructional, which would be student activities and athletics, there was no adjustment there. So, as I just, as I mentioned, the major changes came in the compensation for the proposed compensation for some of these other groups with the compensation plans that are being addressed. Also, no change to the debt service. That's the same as it was presented, and the budgetary reserve. Just to remind everybody that is up from where we were previously. Years ago, we did budgeted a kind of a nominal amount to catch in case something were to happen that was unbudgeted. This does include essentially about $1 million, a little over $1 million for the charter tuition. There's a portion of it that is budgeted up in the instructional areas in the 1100 and 1200 series, and then there's that balance that is in that this 5900 series.
Can I ask a quick question? It's a little tiny number, it's just a curiosity question. Higher education
Thank you.
programs, is that our dual enrollment programs, or?
That-
I was just curious, I don't remember seeing that before, I may have missed it.
Yeah,
Just one-
that relates to the Montgomery County Community College.
Dual enrollment?
Is that the Gateway to College?
Gateway College, thank you.
Gateway to College program?
Oh,
which
that's
is-
something different.
Yeah, it's like a program for students that are not on track. The college may be their pathway, finishing up.
okay.
It's something Mrs. Giblin helps to coordinate through her lab. So we have money's probably set aside for up to 2 students. I think usually it's 1, up to 2 students
Oh,
to help.
That was just a curiosity, like I said, I don't recall seeing that broken out before, and I'm just wondering. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. So on debt service, the $5.5 billion, does that include the subtraction of any plan con reimbursement? Is that included somewhere?
The plan con is a revenue line item, so
Okay.
this is.
It's in that side then?
Yeah, it's going to be the
Okay.
revenue side, opposed to this, this is just the expenditure
The
side.
actual
So,
debt service?
yeah, there's it's similar to any of the expenditures for retirement, Social Security, where we're getting state subsidy back, but it basically, from an accounting perspective, it needs an expenditure show up on one side, the revenues on the other, and then you ultimately
Makes a
see-
wash somewhere.
see the net, the
Yeah.
net result of this.
Okay.
On this end.
I thought so, I just wanted to be sure.
Yep. And look, a chart that works. I just wanted to leave that in there just so I could prove that there were charts
That
that
they
actually
did.
did work.
Screenshot it.
Yep.
I sent it to Jim.
There you go.
So similarly, here's the breakdown. So instead of looking at instructional, non-instructional, this is to show the breakdown between salaries, benefits, purchase service. Something like that.
It's just easier to see
Yeah.
if it's darker.
Um,
Better, much better.
Is that better?
Yep.
Supplies, property, etc. So, Melanie, since you had mentioned the 5,000 to 1,500 series is has to do with the debt service, and then it's broken down between the 800s bond interest and then the 900s bond principal. So there's a further breakdown inside of the account structure that PD has us report all the information.
Okay.
And then another chart.
If any of you out there
Yeah.
has any questions, just say. I'm good with that.
And then just, this is graphically to show that, essentially the primary expenditures that we're seeing here as a district are the personnel costs, both from the salary and a benefits perspective. Those giant blue and orange sections make up the lion's share of the overall expenditures. Just to remind the committee, we had gone through, assessed the collection rate and bump that up from 96% to 97%. We've seen that in the past. So essentially, for the audience, the 96% is basically our anticipated collection rate of our overall property tax. And so we've been experiencing a higher than expected rate of collection. So we bumped that to 97 to more accurately reflect the anticipated revenue from the taxes. We also increased the EIT and the interest income substantially. We've been benefiting from having the Fed continue to increase interest rates. So that's been a benefit on the interest income side. Additionally, to reiterate, the governor's budget proposal is not included here. There's a slide further on that's $880,000 worth of anticipated or projected revenues if the governor's proposal were to be fully adopted by the general council, but we're not there, so it's not built in. I haven't heard much of what other districts are doing. Sometimes people budget a portion of it. Other times, it depends on how everybody's feeling at the time. We usually get some more guidance from ASBO and IU and some other people who are more in tune to Harrisburg's actions. And then the 2.34% tax increase would be needed to cover the additional wages in the teacher's contract. It's the breakdown of revenue from local, state, and federal levels. As you can see, the majority of it is from the local side. That includes all of these areas. So it's more than just the current real estate. There are additional revenue streams from the local side. Granted, the real estate does make up the majority of this total $48 million revenue. 40 million, 40.5 million are the real estate taxes. This does include a 3.67% tax increase. We'll see also the EIT right here, anticipated 4.2 million EIT, and then trying to go over here. Interest income, as I said, is up. We took that into account.
Dan, quick question. What's the interim real estate? What's that cover?
Interim real estate when a new parcel or a new property comes into existence.
It's like during property development or something?
It's for the development, and then when properties sell. So if they're transferred, let's see.
But that's the
That's
real,
gonna be
when it sells, it'd be the real estate transfer, right?
The transfer is in the real estate. The interim, it would be for any assessed value changes. So
Okay.
whether it was a matter of a new development, a new property, or just an addition to an existing property, when we get the report from the county, it basically generates, we get that, and it'll basically detail the assessed value prior, the new assessed value, and then we would issue an interim on that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, if you put a pool in or you had a reassessment on your own property, that would be included in that.
Any other questions on that?
No, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.
And this is graphically, this one got really messy if I put labels, because there's about 12, different sources of revenue that make up this little tiny sliver. But you can see that this breakdown, and the major part of the local revenue is the current real estate line item. Moving on to state revenues, here's the breakdown of what we are budgeting for anticipated revenues from the state, everywhere from basic ed funding and special ed funding. There's a transportation subsidy. Excuse me. Melanie, to your question, this rental and sinking fund payments, this is the revenue line item that relates to the
Debt
the debt service.
Gotcha.
So that's approaching, that's that almost $800,000. And as I mentioned earlier, this state property tax reduction is 1.4 million. We had last year's figure in as a placeholder previously, and so that went up, from 1.45 to 1.463. So that's that swing, essentially in the real estate side, real estate tax side versus the state. So essentially, it's a revenue stream that's coming from the state to make up for the discount that we give to the homestead and farmstead properties.
So is that net neutral then? Everything we discount for the farmstead, homestead exclusion, we get back from the state?
Yes.
I don't think I ever realized that.
So I will say, it's net neutral in that there's, as I went through it, there was I think there was about a $390 difference right now, which I think is part
I
of
just realized that last week.
Yeah, I just always
I got the
assumed-
email, it said 1.9 million in revenue from, or it was more than that, from all the gaming. And I was like, this is awesome, right on the heels of budget. And they're like, nope.
No,
It's already there.
Yeah, it was crazy.
It's essentially given right back to the homestead and farmstead
Well,
properties.
I actually thought it was the other way around. I didn't realize we got any help from the state for the money that we give back for the homes. So
Right.
I was like, oh, I was
Yeah, it's-
thought that was a negative. At least it's neutral.
Yeah.
Well, Shapiro has something in there where he wants to draw in more going forward, I think, if I remember correctly. I was reading it yesterday. But we'll wait and see. what
Yeah,
happens.
basically, the discount from, or the money that's raised from gambling goes directly to the taxpayers. In essence, that's the way I looked at it, directly there for their portion, and is in essence reimbursed for those discounts, because as you shared, it's right on the bill.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. There's a slide later on that shows kind of the calculation as it currently stands. Graphs that work. So, like you see, the basic ed is the major portion of the state revenue, as well as then special ed subsidy and the retirement contribution. So that 4.7 million is essentially the state's portion of the PSERS expense. So when we see 34% listed as far as the PSERS contribution, the district is paying 34%. What we'll see in return is essentially half of that coming back. So we would see roughly 17%, where I say roughly is anything that any of the positions that are funded through federal grant money is essentially not reimbursed from the state, because you can't take federal money and then claim it and say, hey, the state needs to give us money too. That's not allowed. The double dip. It's not allowed. And speaking of from the federal side, here's the breakdown. You'll see the Title I funds. This is where there's an additional $149,000 worth of revenue that's detailed here that we're anticipating for next year. We do have, like I said, a corresponding expenditure on the expense side. And since we're in the process of getting everything uploaded into the PDE's website, I figured I'd give the committee kind of a sneak peek on the form itself. This is definitely still in a draft form, but this is basically how it gets detailed to PDE when we on the proposed final budget. So these are excerpts from the form that'll be on display both on the website and here at the Ed Center. So you'll see essentially a detailing of the anticipated fund balance at the beginning of the 23-24 school year, the revenue. There is a couple rounding issues. There's like a single dollar here and there that are rounded off a little differently than on the presentation itself. From the local sources, state sources, and federal. And presentation, this $2,000, it's essentially for insurance recovery. So anytime, normally if we have some sort of insurance claim, we're able to net that against the expense that we're going to incur. So instead of having a revenue, so it's the opposite of the bond sinking fund versus the debt service, where if we were to incur additional expenses due to, say, some freezing activities over Christmas, we get to take, any of those insurance proceeds and we net those against the expenditures that we've incurred minus the deductible we would have to pay. If they cross years, which we've had in the past, we have a nominal amount in here that would take into account any revenues that we would receive in the next year for insurance claims that we had in the prior year. Because once it goes into the next year, we can't net them together anymore. They have to be split out. So it's a lot of explanation for $2,000. But when you go through it, you're going to go, where is that 2,000? It's actually in the presentation itself and on the charts. It's in the local revenue. It's not split out separately because it is, like I said, it's a nominal amount. And then here's the breakdown. So it's a similar breakdown to what was just shown. I'm just showing it on the state form. Like I said, there's a rounding difference here or there based on how we have it calculated based on an Excel format. Once we put it into the state form, it rounds it how it's going to round it off. And so we have a dollar difference in a couple of these areas. But overall, you'll see that the revenues are lined up, 71.677 million of anticipated revenue. And then on the expenditure side, the breakdown, similarly, here's that $4,000 that Judy was asking about. So it basically follows the same structure, just showing it on the state form itself. That we'll have ready for Thursday's meeting for signature and posting. And I keep throwing this out there as far as the state. So, like I said, this is about $880,000 of question mark, as far as whether or not that this revenue is going to be anything that the district can expect or experience. It's not currently built in here. Keeping an eye out to see what, if there's any guidance as far as what other people are doing in other districts. But it's kind of a toss-up, and I'd rather take the conservative approach, still be transparent with the committee that this revenue is not in there. But if the governor's budget were to pass as it was presented originally, essentially our revenue would come in $880,000 higher than we had budgeted. So just want to be.
That's a good swing.
It would be a nice swing, but I don't know
When
that.
that we decide.
Yeah, right. No.
I'm going to get my crystal ball and find out. No, I don't. Unfortunately, typically it comes down to we're in the process of completing our budget prior to the state finalizing their budget, and so it's there's just a lot of question marks. So
880,000 of them
It's probably,
here.
it's even longer with the first term,
Yes.
mhm.
Yeah, I would imagine.
first year.
Right.
I think it's already gone to the end of the year, hasn't it?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
As in the past.
That's what I thought.
You're lucky if it gets settled by June, July,
Yeah.
well, July, really.
Yeah, one of the years I was on the board, it
It was
was,
forever.
wasn't it like August before we sold the fund?
It was long, yeah.
Yeah.
It was long.
It's ridiculous. Can you imagine we ran our house that way?
Yeah, right?
So this slide is detailing the millage and the tax history. I wanted to bring attention to the tax increases for the past couple of years, in 21, 22, and 22, 23 years. So we did have that 0% tax increase in 21, 22, and then this year, was a 1.35% tax increase. Wanted to bring that up because clearly those aren't really keeping up with inflation by any means, and the additional expenditures that we're seeing as a district, both from salaries and benefits, as well as just normal everyday supplies. So, roughly, if we were to look at a 5% adjusted index, which would be is a 4.67% increase over the 3 years, 21-22, 22-23, and 23-24, we'd be roughly 2% of a tax increase. If we're to factor in where we were for last year, this year, and then, from my vantage point, if we did end up at the max adjusted index, essentially the 3-year average would be roughly a 2% tax increase. As I mentioned, I wanted to point out, so we do have inflationary issues that we've experienced over the past couple years, but as everybody's feeling it, in their household, the district also feels it from an expenditure standpoint, from supplies, even our fuel's down and locked in, so we're actually fortunate to lock in at a substantially lower rate than we had for this year, but it's still higher than what it was 2 years ago. This slide is showing essentially the details at each 1% increment, with the exception of this 1.34%. That was the percentage needed to essentially cover the teacher's contract. This did drop a little bit because of the property reduction amount going from the 1.4 to 1.45 to 1.46 from the gaming proceeds, but that was about a $12,000 swing. So essentially, this is still a pretty accurate figure for covering those salaries from the professional staff contract. So if we walk across, at a 0%, there's a decrease. Essentially, the revenue, the local revenue is down this $34,000. In order to balance the budget, we would deem this $3.2 million out of fund balance, and then this would be the impact to the median household in the district. And then same thing as you kind of move down 1%, 2%, and so on. As I said, this would be the max at 5%. It's a 4.67% tax increase. Essentially generates another $1.9 million of local revenue, and would still necessitate a $1.2 million use of fund balance. And then here's the impact on the median household income. As I mentioned earlier, we currently have built in that 4%. That was the kind of I'll call it middle ground in my mind from, honestly, looking at the 5% and still, needing the use of fund balance. I'm leaning toward the 5, but I was trying to, as I said earlier, in one of the other finance committee meetings, trying to balance between covering the additional salaries and then on top of that, any of the additional ones that we've had since then with the conversations with the compensation plans, and then the burden on the taxpayer. This is the breakdown of the state property tax relief. So this is the revised number that was issued on May 1st. Here are the number of homesteads and farmsteads in the district. And then essentially, what we need to do is take basically distribute this 1.4 million across those particular parcels. It yields an assessment exclusion of $7,300, which yields essentially a tax decrease of $241. So this 7,300 is just the decrease of the assessed value. Ultimately, when looking at the tax bill, this is kind of what everybody's looking for. That doesn't necessarily show up on the tax bill directly. It's really the decrease in the assessed value that does appear there. So here's the draft action item for Thursday's meeting. And essentially, asking the committee to provide some guidance on what you would like to see as far as a millage increase in this percentage here, and then the impact of essentially the tax increase that goes along with that. As we kind of move forward, there's still time, essentially this is going to be the final proposed. Even before Thursday, I'm still going to be looking at the budget to see if there's any room, any expenditures that we're not going to incur, we don't think we're going to incur, and likewise on the revenue side to see if there's any ability to generate additional revenue, either from, that's mostly reassessing the interest income, making sure that our EIT is as accurate as we think it can be, still within reason. I don't want to take the most aggressive, the aggressive budget and then be wrong on the revenue side or the expenditure side for that matter. But we'll still be looking at that over the next couple of days. And so this, I'll say this number, this 73, 561, 930, that could change by Thursday. Ideally in the downward direction.
Yep.
That's always the goal.
Please.
Yep.
Have we locked in our fuel costs yet?
Yes.
Okay.
That helps at least.
Because last month we hadn't done that yet, but you said you thought we were going to be
Yeah,
doing that
it's
soon.
essentially
So
the week
so we're
following.
not estimating that anymore. We know what that
It was
is.
essentially the week following, the prices had dipped back down, and actually the consultant that we work with through the IU had reached out and had touched base and said, hey, this is
It's
probably a
pretty
good time. So we looked into it, and we had moved on that. We did lock in 100% of our take, essentially, rather than trying to step into it like last year where we took 50%, or we locked in 50% hoping for prices to come down, which they did last year.
I was lucky.
These are lower rates than what we've had for this year, so we're pretty comfortable, as comfortable as you can be with the gas rates. More savings on the diesel side than the unleaded side.
Okay. So, dear committee
Dan,
members,
can you flip back to the?
Yeah, thank you.
very much.
yeah, that's the
I
one.
figured I needed
Your
to go
reminder
there.
here.
That was the one.
And I will say, these are relatively round numbers with the exception of 2.34. I'm more than happy to put together something in between if that would aid the committee or the full board in making a determination.
All right, so I'll start. So I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I don't like to raise taxes, but with our new teacher's contract, I really don't see that we have a choice. And if I have to say it out loud, I would say the 4%. I'd be comfortable with that. So hoping that the state comes up with their extra $800,000, that leaves us, that's half of the fund balance needed. And I hate to say the word 4%. I'm so sorry. I'll apologize for it now.
3.67.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, all right.
It's the 3.67.
Bradley's not here.
It's a 4% millage increase.
Okay.
Tax increase, really 3.67.
Okay,
It's a salad better,
I'll go next, and yes, it's all optics.
totally.
Yeah,
And what
thank you.
people are actually going to read in the town and country.
Would be the 4%, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, what they'll focus on. I wasn't thinking 4%, but I was thinking 3.5%, at least.
So that would take us
Now-
to about 1.8, give or take a few dollars here and there.
Yeah. Now, the one thing about this, we can realize, and it all depends on what you want to do. When we adopt the budget, when we adopt that number in May, that number in June could always go down. You can never raise it.
Right.
I want to make that clear to our
That's
audience.
really optics. Yeah.
Okay? Just so you
Not
understand
wanting to
that.
do a baby switch.
So like,
No.
yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can raise it.
It can.
It can.
It'll be
Well,
just far
we would
over.
never-
We went through that, we went through our
We would never
conversation
wanna
last
do
time.
that.
but
Okay.
It's not like
I
it
agree.
can't. Correct, correct.
I'll stand corrected. You shouldn't raise it, and I would never do that.
I would never do
So-
that either.
So you're saying 5?
No.
No,
Yeah.
no, I'd say 3.5, but I could understand 4 if we look at it very hard and try and get it down to 3.5 or preferably 3.
Judy?
So, I was sort of in that same ballpark as Keith. Willing to do 4, but if we could get it to 3.5, I just don't know if our administration is gonna be comfortable with that. But, so, I'm okay with 4, and I'll follow that recommendation, at least for the preliminary,
Okay.
and see what
And hope
we
it goes
do.
lower.
See if we, yeah. You know.
Yeah, I
But
don't think,
I'm okay with 4.
I mean, I don't think at this point that that's overdoing it. I really don't.
Nope.
I feel like our in the last couple of years, we've been really trying to make it closer, and last year was closer.
Yep,
Yes.
we're definitely doing
And
that.
I can see, we had a surplus, yes, but I can see,
But we know why.
exactly. It
saw
wasn't
that.
just, whoa, we got $5 million
Yeah.
extra dollars.
You've done a great job this year when it comes
Yes,
to
you have.
the committee and telling us why, like,
Yeah.
hey, I budgeted this and yay, we got more money. You
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
So,
And if I say 4%, then you know I feel comfortable with that. Because I would never say 4%.
I'm hoping that by June, we should at least, because I remember in previous years, we started at least getting a feel, even if the budget wasn't, actually passed the governor's, proposal and the legislation, even if they hadn't hammered it out, you started to get a feel for it. Like, I remember Tina being like, well, it looks like we're gonna get, maybe this one's gonna get the 1.3, but, this is never coming out of committee. And maybe, like I said, if we get some of that 800,000,
Yep,
then we could look at the 3.5.
okay.
If not, then I agree, we need to go with the 4.
Yeah.
But if we, like I said, if we can play with those numbers a little bit, because they will see 4 and think 4, not 3.6.
Yeah, you're right, even I said it out loud that way.
Well, that's what's in the motion itself.
Right, because that's what it is, you increase the millage, not the taxes,
Right.
so.
Right.
And that's why we do have.
That's why that step is-
We do have it spelled out to
Yeah.
kind of show both sides, because it, essentially, from the district's perspective, the millage is really what's driving the calculation. But ultimately, from the taxpayer perspective, how's it going to impact the taxpayer? That's where that 3.67 comes into play. So even though 4 is the millage, that, what the taxpayer would experience would be that 3.67. I
Could
will
you
say.
just go back to
Yeah.
chart 1?
One more time.
Where am I going here?
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Thanks. I apologize, I was late, I didn't hear the expenditure part, but does that include the $288,000 for the armed guards?
That was already in the budget.
Yeah.
That was
Sorry.
already in
Okay.
the facilities budget.
So that won't decrease or eliminate any programs or anything?
No,
Okay, great.
no, we'll just be
Not eliminated
operating.
anything.
Right, we didn't back off anything. So this is more high level, if you will.
Yeah.
Um,
So the motion will read, motion to approve the Upper Brookfield School District 2023-24 proposed final budget, attachment J, in the amount of $73,561,930 with a millage increase of 4.0%, resulting in a tax increase of 3.67%, and to allow for discussion over the next month and authorization for official advertisement of its availability for public inspection of the following areas.
Yep,
So the next question is, what would you like to see on Thursday night? Do you want to see another presentation? Give Dan another chance to dazzle us with this? Or are we comfortable having this as an agenda item and talking through it?
I think we can talk through it.
Just whatever,
Because as long as you just address the minor changes, we haven't had that many changes since
Right.
his
Yeah, I was gonna say, address the high
I just think we want to make sure that you're
Any
comfortable.
changes?
So as long as we highlight that and say, hey, we got this, we got
So
this
not
number
presentations, you're
from
right.
the beginning.
I'll take it off.
So we did that, just the changes, I
Okay.
think. is good.
Reiterate the fact that the governor's budget hasn't passed yet, we haven't included that.
And we're hopeful
And then we're hopeful that that may decrease,
that could half our,
You
that
should-
could half our
Essentially, use of
our
funds.
spend.
So that's a conversation at the point, if the motion comes up and it's seconded in discussion, then it kicks over for a discussion as opposed to a,
Or just any questions.
yeah, I'm saying, whatever, I just want to make sure that the agenda's right
Yeah.
and that Dan knows what's expected for that, so, okay.
I'm good with that.
Okay, shall we make a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
On the agenda, just draft.
I can't believe I said that. I
We
feel
have
so
a recording,
bad.
it's recorded right there.
I know, I'm so sorry.
No, if it makes you
So
feel
I'm gonna call
better.
Bradley and tell him to have the headline be Melanie Cunningham.
Yeah, actually said there should be a tax increase.
It's recommended.
So sorry.
I'll try and make you feel better, but, you know, because if we do look at the past couple of years, last year, this year, and then, you know, at 3.67% tax increase, it's sub 2%
I know.
on average. I mean, so,
Wouldn't hurt if you maybe
Yeah,
mentioned that.
that's a good.
It's a very good point.
I mean, when you're discussing on a normal basis where inflationary, you know, accounts, you know, for, you know, inflation accounts for roughly 2% is what the Fed aims for, and they're well off the mark, or we're well off the mark recently, that 2% is essentially isn't even keeping up with inflation, you know, when it comes down to overall consumer price index.
I know.
I
Still doesn't
know
make
you
me feel
know, I was trying. I
Thank
was
you,
trying.
Dan, I appreciate that. I mean, I think, just to further that, I think, this will make me feel a little better. You know, we did the last couple of years when we were in COVID, we tried to really think about that and really make it as close as we could because, you know, because we needed to. So, you know, we have some catch up. Our teacher contract didn't help that. That was a lot. That's a lot to make up. All right,
But that's an important piece for everyone.
it is.
I mean, that, you know, that the contract itself and the work that we're doing right now on the compensation plans that
Yes.
are coming up because they're split over a couple of years.
Yep.
Those are all important pieces to having our staff and,
It's important to have our staff, we have to have our staff. If we aren't paying them enough, we need to make sure we can get them. And the compensation plans, we've been working really hard on them to try to make them fair
The other spin is,
and attractive.
we talk about revenues and expenditures, but if you take out the expenditure aspect and go, this is an investment into the education
That's
of our
true.
students,
That's true.
I mean, that's, okay, here's the additional revenue, here's the additional tax increase and the tax burden, I understand that. But it is to put into the schools, whether it's for staffing, whether it's for facilities,
Yeah.
it all goes down.
Yep, we have to
It
pay
comes
for
down
it
to that.
somewhere.
It does.
It's true. So now that everyone's going to kick me off the board, no, I'm just kidding. Do we have anything else?
That was the only topic I had.
I just want to
on the
confirm
agenda.
that we do not have a meeting next Monday because at one point we had two meetings. We had this
Yeah, we
one
don't.
and, okay, I just want to confirm that.
Next one's not till June.
And the next one is June
12th.
12th, ahead of the 15th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Just any final touches.
All right, well, if we don't have, does anyone in the audience have any questions? Yeah? We put you to sleep?
No explanations needed for anything.
I'm sorry if I put you to sleep.
No, you didn't.
It's okay.
And it wasn't a step presentation.
That's true, yeah. if it was
Well,
a
I have
step-
one.
I think I can do it in my sleep. All right, well, in that case, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Agenda's already updated. Move the presentation.
All right.
Agenda draft. Okay, we're gonna send it out.
Please, one more. Please, one more. My accountant's hard. It'll be okay. I'll be okay.